So, what came first? The chicken or the egg? Well, the answer is obvious. It's clearly the chicken.
Egg. It will rise once more, and it will all begin with a simple egg.
So it was a dark night on a world far, far away. Now this world was much like the usual overworld that we all know, as this world had players, and villagers, and animals, and the land looked rather similar. Just the skies were green, and the oceans were green, and some of the creatures did look a little odd. But anyways, it was a normal night in that world, and all the villagers were just sleeping in their warm beds, dreaming about that magical subscribe button, when suddenly the village was filled with the sounds of a chicken screaming. All the villagers were awoken, the farmers leapt out of bed, and they ventured over to the animal pens to see why there was a chicken making all this noise. And rather quickly it became apparent that there was just one chicken doing all of this, as all the others were cowering away within a corner. Well, the one individual chicken was circling in the opposite corner, hollering out in pain. Now for some reason that individual chicken had grown to be twice the size of all others. Just in that night, his yelling was only getting more intense. The pain it felt was likely immeasurable. The farmers noticed a torn up red book near that chicken. It had bite marks in it. Oh, perhaps the chicken had tried to eat that book. The farmers went over to the chicken to see if they could help it, thinking that maybe it was suffocating, because chickens weren't designed to eat books, and that book had clearly been eaten. But as the farmers approached, the chicken's clucks grew deeper and more vicious, as the chicken even tried to kill them. A red aura emanated off the chicken, and then it promptly died, and its body fell to the ground, which for some reason was now a normal size. But regardless of the oddity, the farmers rushed over to its dead body, but before they could touch it, it was engulfed in flames, and in the next second, it was gone, burnt to nothingness. The villagers quickly fought that fire, fearing that it could spread and engulf the entire village. And thankfully they were able to tame that fire and extinguish it. But as the farmers were just calming down from that event, they saw something in the place where that crazy demonic chicken had just died. It was an egg. The villagers were very confused. Nothing like this had ever happened before. So they really wanted to know why this had happened, and who caused it. And they believed they might just have a clue to figure that out, as that book, there was no reason for it to be there within that animal pen. None of them could even read, and so in their mind, if they could figure out whose book that was, then they would learn who the culprit of this crime was, and with that, they could be charged for their crimes. And so one of the farmers went to retrieve that half-eaten red book, but he couldn't find it. It was gone. They had seen it just a few minutes ago, and now it had vanished. Wait, it probably burned in that fire. That was annoying. They would never be able to find out whose book that was now, and so the culprit would never be charged. But anyways, there was nothing that they could do about that. The area was safe now, and they just needed to move on. Life had to keep on living, even if they didn't know who caused all that. And so the farmers calmed down all the other chickens, and they retrieved the egg that arose from that crazy demonic chicken. Their plan was to save the chicken within that egg, as it still deserved a chance at life. And so given the fact that the crazy chicken was now gone, they made the decision to place it within a warm glass jar within one of their homes, and to let the egg hatch naturally within that jar. It would be like an incubator in a way. And so they left their egg for the next few days, and they continued with their normal day-to-day lives. As they traded, they farmed, they pressed that subscribe button, they ate, and they slept. Just normal life. But that would change, as on one sunset just a few days later, a beam of glowing red light shot up into the sky. The villagers were scared. This was again something that they had never seen happen before, and so many thought that this was it. This was the beginning of the end, and so they hid in their homes, cowering in the corners, prepared for the worst. But there were some brave villagers who didn't want to go hide, and thus they went to investigate, venturing towards the ominous red beam. Rather quickly, they realised it was coming from their egg, and so they broke into that house and they stared at the egg. By this time it was almost 3 times the size of any normal egg, and so one of the villagers cautiously took a few more steps towards the egg, ready to touch it. But as soon as they were in range to make contact with the egg, the beam just stopped. That was odd. Nothing else happened to the egg though. It seemed stable. And so with the beam gone, and there being no apparent danger, the villagers all calmed down, and they went back to doing whatever it was they were doing before. But later that day, as the villagers were settling into bed, they'd noticed that all the stars tonight, well, they were red. That was strange, but none of them thought too much about that. It was probably some natural cosmic event. And so, they all went to sleep. It was midnight, and all the villagers were up. But they weren't their normal selves, as they were all in a trance-like state. And so collectively, they made their way to the village town centre, where abruptly, they all began to stare right up at the red stars. And with that, the hallucinations begun. There was a walking jukebox, and a red crystal, and these giant glowing eyes. But nothing was actually there. The villagers were all seeing the same strange hallucination. And then began the insanity. They couldn't handle what they had just witnessed. Some began to jump into lava. Some just ran off into the wilderness. And others simply exploded. The villagers were all screaming, for they were terrified. It was mass hysteria. And soon, only 3 villagers remained. Now, they all calmed down. They were normal. They were chilled. But by that time, the rest of the villagers were dead. And so the remaining survivors met up, and they began to talk.
How did this happen? I don't know. Why did this happen? I don't know. Will it happen again? Listen, I don't know. Why are you asking me? Wait a second. Actually, maybe I do know. Maybe it's because of that egg. You know, the one that came from that demonic crazy chicken. All these weird things started when it arrived. So why don't we destroy it? That might save us.
And so together they walked into the farmhouse, swords in hand, ready to crush that egg. But it was gone. The villagers were confused. Where had it gone? But one of them had an idea, and so he told the other 2 to just wait here. He was going to get a very special light source that could potentially help them find the egg. It was just in the house next door. He was only going to be gone for a second. And so while he was out collecting his special light source, the other 2 villagers were looking around, trying to see if that egg had just rolled somewhere else. They didn't know, when suddenly they heard screaming. One of them began to run to the door, but the other villager stopped him. They stared at each other, and without even speaking to each other, a message was conveyed. They had to stay inside, as outside was just far too dangerous. There was too much oddity there, and that villager who had just left, well, he was probably dead now, just like the rest of the village. Something was going on outside, and it was to do with that egg. They just knew it. What else would it be? But there was nothing that they could do about that. They could only remain here, within the safety of that house, away from the dangers of the egg. So, those 2 villagers stayed within that house for the next few days. In that time, they desperately tried to find the egg, but it was definitely gone. It wasn't in that house anymore. Now they sustained themselves in this time by feasting upon the various food supplies within that house. But eventually those meager rations ran out, so things were not looking good. They were going to start starving soon if they didn't get new food. But they didn't want to go outside to do that. They feared that they would die if they did that due to this egg curse. But they also knew that they couldn't hide here forever. They were going to die, and so they came up with an excellent plan. One of them was going to run out, grab all the food in the nearby potato farm, and then return as quickly as possible, while the other villager was going to be watching out for any incoming threats. And then they were going to cook all these potatoes, using the furnaces here. That should sustain them for a few more weeks, which would hopefully give them a bit more time just to figure out what they needed to do next. So one of the brave villagers ran outside, and he began to harvest the potatoes as quickly as possible. The other watched from the window, looking out for incoming danger. Things were going really well. He had collected just over half the potatoes, and hope was finally filling their hearts. They were going to live. But then he fell to the ground. Dead. Well, this plan hadn't worked, and so that final villager was terrified. What was he meant to do now? He didn't think that other villager was just going to die randomly. That just wasn't a thought. and so he looked back at the dead body of his fallen friend. He was going to be just like him, dead. But then a sudden compulsion took over him. He felt drawn to the outside. He could save the world. He just needed to face the sun. No, he tried to resist this. It was clearly a fake lure by the curse that had fallen upon this land, but the draw was too much. He gave in to the urges and went outside. Instantly, a light enveloped him, and in the sky he saw it. That egg. It was giant now. The villager was just in awe. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. But he exploded, and then the sky began to crack open. The egg flew away, and thus began the great corruption of that world. No one was safe, for the world was dying. So to learn what happens next, you'll need to watch this video.